On the night of February 14, 2022, police entered a home in Saugerties, New York, looking for a little girl who had been missing since she was 4 years old. They had received information that 6-year-old Paislee Joann Shultis was being kept somewhere inside the residence. The search had already lasted more than an hour. Officers had moved through the house. They had examined the rooms. They had searched the property. And then Detective Eric Tila noticed something about a staircase leading toward the basement. The construction looked wrong. There was something about the steps that did not fit. Tila used a flashlight and looked through a crack between the wooden boards. He saw what appeared to be a blanket. The staircase looked solid, but something was hidden behind it. Investigators began removing the wooden steps. Then they saw a pair of tiny feet. Behind the staircase was 6-year-old Paislee Shultis. She had been missing for more than 2 years, and she was alive. Police found her with her biological mother, Kimberly Cooper, inside what investigators described as a small, cold and wet hidden space beneath the staircase. Paislee was taken from the house and brought to police headquarters. Paramedics examined her. Police said she was in good health. She was then returned to her legal guardian and reunited with her older sister. The case that had begun with a 4-year-old child disappearing had suddenly become a rescue. But the discovery also raised a difficult question. How had Paislee remained so close to investigators for so long without being found? And why had police visited the same residence before? Before we go further, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Paislee's story reached far beyond New York, and cases like this show how important a community can become when a child is missing. Paislee Joann Shultis was 4 years old when she was reported missing in July 2019. The official Saugerties Police Department account says she was reported missing from Spencer, New York, by her legal guardian and maternal grandmother. Other major news reports describe the disappearance as being from Cayuga Heights. That difference in location reporting has continued to appear in coverage of the case, and it is important not to blur those accounts together. What is consistent across the reporting is that Paislee was under the care of a legal guardian when she disappeared, and investigators believed her biological parents, Kimberly Cooper and Kirk Shultis Jr., were responsible for taking her. They were not her custodial parents. Police said the biological parents had lost custody of Paislee and her older sister. The precise circumstances surrounding the custody decision were not fully disclosed by authorities, and the family court history should not be filled in with speculation. What was known was that Paislee was supposed to remain in the care of someone else. Then she disappeared. The disappearance was reported on July 13, 2019. At the time, Paislee was only 4. Her older sister was also living outside the biological parents' custody. The disappearance immediately became a missing child investigation. Authorities believed Paislee had been taken by her non-custodial parents. That belief would remain central to the investigation for the next 2.5 years. The case was unusual from the beginning because investigators were not simply searching for an unknown stranger. They were looking at people who were already connected to Paislee. Her biological parents were known, and police believed they had taken her after losing custody. Yet knowing who investigators suspected did not mean knowing where Paislee was. The trail disappeared. Police were told that Kimberly Cooper had fled with Paislee. According to reporting based on police statements, Kirk Shultis Jr. told investigators that Cooper had taken their daughter and gone to Pennsylvania. But investigators continued considering other possibilities, and eventually, their attention repeatedly returned to Saugerties. Saugerties is in Ulster County in New York's Hudson Valley. That was where Paislee's paternal grandfather, Kirk Shultis Sr., owned a residence. It was also where police would eventually find the missing child. But the discovery was still years away. For Paislee's family, those years meant uncertainty. There was no confirmed location, no photograph of her in public, no ordinary explanation for why a 4-year-old had disappeared, and no way for investigators to simply assume that the case was over because a lead had failed. The search continued. Saugerties police and other agencies followed leads connected to the residence. According to the Saugerties Police Department's later account, investigators had returned to the Fawn Road property multiple times during the investigation. The department's 2022 year-end report says the residence had been searched in connection with information about Paislee's whereabouts, but the occupants denied knowing where she was. On some occasions, investigators had only limited access to parts of the home. That mattered, because the residence would eventually become the center of the entire case. The house was not an unknown location discovered at the very end of a nationwide search. It had already appeared in the investigation. That is one of the most striking elements of the story. The answer was not necessarily hundreds of miles away. It was in a place investigators had already been looking at. Now that you know who Paislee was and why authorities were searching for her, think about how different her life might have looked during those missing years. What do you hope her story meant to the people who loved her? Tell me in the comments, and keep Paislee's name at the center of this story, not just the circumstances of her disappearance. After Paislee disappeared, investigators continued working leads. The Saugerties residence repeatedly drew attention. Police said the occupants denied knowledge of Paislee's whereabouts. According to the department's account, Kirk Shultis Jr. told officers that he had not seen Paislee since she disappeared and that Kimberly had left with the child. That explanation became part of the investigation, but investigators did not stop looking. A missing child case can change with every new piece of information. A new witness can change the direction of an investigation. A new tip can send officers to a completely different location. And in Paislee's case, tips repeatedly brought investigators back to the same general place, the residence on Fawn Road. The problem was that police did not have enough information to make the breakthrough they needed. They needed evidence strong enough to justify a more extensive search. Then, on February 14, 2022, information arrived that changed the case. Saugerties police received a tip indicating that Paislee was being held at a hidden location inside the Fawn Road residence. Investigators corroborated the information. A judge authorized a search warrant. And at approximately 8:06 that evening, Saugerties police, with assistance from the New York State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation and uniformed state troopers, went to the residence. The search warrant changed everything. Police were no longer simply following a lead. They were legally authorized to conduct a thorough search of the property for the missing child. The occupants reportedly denied knowing where Paislee was. According to the Saugerties Police Department's later report, they told officers they had not seen her since she was reported missing in 2019. But the officers kept searching. The house was examined. More than an hour passed. And then Detective Eric Thiele noticed the staircase. It led from the back of the residence down toward the basement. The construction caught his attention. Something appeared out of place. He looked more closely. Then he used a flashlight. Through a crack between the wooden steps, he saw something that appeared to be a blanket. That alone did not prove that Paislee was behind the stairs. The staircase appeared solid. There was no obvious door. No normal entrance. Nothing that immediately announced there was a hidden space behind the boards. But the detective's suspicion was enough to justify a closer examination. Thiele and Detective Sergeant Paul Gambino began dismantling part of the staircase. Several wooden steps were removed. And then came the moment that changed the investigation. A pair of tiny feet became visible. The missing child was there. Paislee was 6 years old. She had been 4 when she disappeared, and she had been found inside a concealed space beneath the staircase. The woman with her was her biological mother, Kimberly Cooper. Police described the space as small, cold, and wet. The rescue was immediate. Paislee was brought out. She was taken to police headquarters. Paramedics examined her, and authorities said she was in good health. There were no reported signs of physical abuse when she was found. But there was another concern. Paislee had been absent from school for much of the period she was missing. Police Chief Joseph Sinagra later told reporters that investigators discovered during their initial interaction with Paislee that she could not read or write and had not been receiving homeschooling. That information became another part of the story, not as a detail to sensationalize, but as evidence of how much of an ordinary childhood had been interrupted. For more than 2 years, Paislee's life had been outside the normal routines that children her age would typically experience. And suddenly, after years of uncertainty, she was safe. The first immediate priority was her health. Then came the reunion. Paislee was returned to her legal guardian. She was reunited with her older sister. The child who had disappeared in 2019 was no longer missing, but the investigation was far from over. Investigators had spent years returning to leads connected to the same Saugerties residence, but the breakthrough came only after a new tip led to a search warrant and a closer examination of the staircase. What do you think was the most important piece of that breakthrough? The tip, the warrant, or Detective Thiele noticing the unusual construction? Share your thoughts below. The discovery immediately led to arrests. Kimberly Cooper was arrested and charged with second-degree custodial interference and endangering the welfare of a child. Kirk Shultis Jr. was charged with first-degree custodial interference and endangering the welfare of a child. Kirk Shultis Sr., Paislee's grandfather and the owner of the residence, was also charged with first-degree custodial interference and endangering the welfare of a child. The distinction between the charges mattered. These were criminal allegations. They were not convictions. The legal system still had to determine what could be proven against each defendant. Shultis Jr. and Shultis Sr. were arraigned and released on their own recognizance. The court also issued stay-away orders of protection involving the 3 defendants. Cooper was taken into custody because she also had an active warrant from Ulster County Family Court. For investigators, however, the central mystery of the missing child case had been solved. Paislee had been found. She was alive. She had been located inside a residence police had previously investigated, and she was found with her biological mother. The question now shifted from, "Where is Paislee?" to what exactly happened during the years she was missing. Police believed Paislee had been living with the family after her disappearance. They also believed the hidden compartment beneath the staircase had been used when police came to the property. Chief Sinagra expressed concern that officers had previously been able to move around the staircase without hearing the child. The official police report later stated that the department believed the hidden location had been used during earlier visits. But that belief must be distinguished from what investigators could directly establish. The physical discovery proved that Paislee was there when the February 2022 search occurred. It did not, by itself, establish every detail of how the space had been used throughout the previous 2 years. That distinction became important as the legal case developed. The story also generated claims and descriptions that went beyond the verified evidence. Reports and rumors circulated about elaborate secret rooms, escape routes, and other features. Later, Kimberly Shultis's attorney disputed some of those descriptions. That is why the physical evidence released by police is more reliable than sensational versions of the story. The police photographs showed the concealed compartment beneath the staircase. The Saugerties Police Department documented its location and described the conditions. Those facts are enough. The case does not need embellishment. The investigation itself was remarkable. A detective noticed an architectural detail. A flashlight revealed what appeared to be a blanket. A section of the staircase was removed, and the child was found. It is easy to look backward and imagine that the answer should have been obvious. But investigations rarely work that way. Police had to work within the evidence and legal authority available at each stage. They had followed tips before. They had visited the residence before. But on February 14, 2022, they had new information, a search warrant, and a detective who noticed something that had previously escaped attention. That combination produced the breakthrough. For 2.5 years, the case had been defined by absence. Now investigators had a child, they had a location, they had physical evidence, and they had 3 people facing charges. But there was still the question of what would happen next. The criminal case moved into the courts, and the public learned that finding Paislee was not the same thing as finishing the legal case. The defendants were entitled to the presumption of innocence. The prosecution still had to prove its allegations, and the courts would determine what happened to the charges. The first court appearances took place shortly after Paislee was found. The case was placed under further legal review. By March 2022, Kimberly Cooper had reaffirmed a not guilty plea. At that stage, the Ulster County District Attorney said there had been no grand jury action or additional charges. The legal process moved slowly. That is often frustrating for people who have watched a case unfold through headlines. The public sees the arrest. The public sees the courtroom photographs. But a criminal case is not finished simply because someone has been arrested. Evidence has to be reviewed. Charges have to be evaluated. And prosecutors have to decide what can appropriately be pursued. For Paislee, the most important immediate outcome was different. She was no longer missing. She had been returned to her legal guardian. She had been reunited with her sister. And the search that had consumed investigators for years had reached its central answer. For more than 2 years, Paislee's family lived with uncertainty about where she was and whether she would ever come home. If you've ever waited for an answer that seemed impossibly far away, what did that waiting teach you? Share only what you're comfortable sharing. The case continued through the courts. In July 2023, Kimberly Shultis reached an agreement with the Ulster County District Attorney's Office. According to News 12, the agreement provided that the charges against her would be dismissed if she stayed out of trouble for 1 year. The same report said that Shultis had custody of Paislee at that time. Her attorney also disputed some of the public descriptions of the hidden space beneath the stairs, saying that earlier reports of a secret room or secret apartment were inaccurate. Those claims should be understood as statements from the defense, not as replacements for the police evidence documenting the compartment. The legal status of the other defendants developed separately. Kirk Shultis Jr. later faced unrelated burglary charges in Ulster County. In April 2024, he pleaded guilty to second-degree burglary in connection with a 2022 Saugerties burglary. That was a separate criminal matter. His earlier custodial interference case involving Paislee should not be confused with the burglary conviction. The Times-Union reported that the custodial interference and child endangerment charges involving the 3 adults had been waived up to Ulster County Court in May 2023. The publicly documented record does not support inventing a dramatic courtroom ending that was never reported. The strongest verified ending to the disappearance itself is simpler. Paislee was found. She was alive. She was medically examined and reported to be in good health. She was reunited with her sister and returned to her legal guardian, and the adults connected to her disappearance faced criminal proceedings. For a missing child case, that rescue was extraordinary. But the story also leaves difficult questions about the years in between. How did Paislee experience those years? What did she understand about being missing? What did she know about the outside world? And how much did the adults around her tell her? Public reporting cannot answer all of those questions, and it would be wrong to pretend that it can. Paislee was a child. Her private experience belongs to her. The responsible way to tell this case is to stay with what investigators actually documented. A 4-year-old was reported missing. Authorities believed her non-custodial biological parents had taken her. Investigators followed leads. A Saugerties residence repeatedly came into the investigation. On February 14, 2022, police received information that Paislee was being held inside a hidden location at that residence. They obtained a search warrant. Detective Eric Thiele noticed something unusual about the basement staircase. Officers dismantled part of it. Paislee was found, and the missing child investigation became a rescue. That is the evidence. That is the story. The phrase, hidden in plain sight, is powerful because the location was not an unknown place. It was a residence investigators had previously visited. The breakthrough was not simply about searching harder. It was about noticing something that had not previously been recognized as significant. A gap, a blanket, an unusual construction, and eventually, a child's feet. There is also something important about the way Paislee's story was told after her rescue. The headlines focused heavily on the staircase. The hidden space became the symbol of the case. But the staircase was not the person who had been missing. Paislee was. And that distinction matters. A child is more than the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. Before the police reports, before the photographs of the staircase, before the courtroom proceedings, Paislee was a little girl. The years she spent missing became a major part of her public story. But they should never become the entirety of her identity. When investigators finally brought her out of that hidden space, they were not simply closing a missing person file. They were returning a child to the people who had been searching for her. They were giving her sister the chance to see her again. And they were giving the public something rare in missing child cases, an ending in which the child was found alive. The case also demonstrates why missing person investigations can remain active long after the initial headlines disappear. For years, a case can seem quiet from the outside. That does not necessarily mean investigators have stopped working. In Paislee's case, police continued following leads. The same residents continued to appear in the investigation. And when a new piece of information finally provided sufficient grounds for a search warrant, investigators acted. The final breakthrough came from a combination of information and observation. Someone provided information about where Paislee might be. Investigators corroborated it. A judge authorized the search. Officers entered the home, and a detective noticed the staircase. The lesson is not that every missing child is secretly nearby. The lesson is that a case can remain unresolved until one verified piece of information connects the unanswered questions. For Paislee, that connection happened on Valentine's Day in 2022. Outside the home, the search became a rescue. Inside, a missing child investigation became physical reality. And after years of uncertainty, Paislee was finally back with her sister. The public may remember the staircase. Investigators may remember the tip. Detective Eric Thiele may remember the moment the construction of the steps caught his attention. Her family may remember something much simpler. Paislee came home. What do you think cracked the case in the end? The persistence of investigators, the information that led to the warrant, or one detective noticing something everyone else had missed? Whatever your answer, keep it respectful. Paislee's story is ultimately about a child who was found alive. There is a temptation in true crime to search for a perfect ending, a confession, a courtroom verdict, a final piece of evidence that explains everything. Paislee's case does not provide that kind of simple ending. It provides something more complicated. A child was recovered alive. Criminal charges followed. One defendant later reached an agreement that could lead to dismissal of the charges against her if she remained out of trouble for a year. Another defendant later pleaded guilty to a separate burglary. And the publicly available reporting does not justify turning the remaining legal questions into a story of certainty where the evidence does not provide one. That restraint is important, because the goal of telling a case like this is not to make it more dramatic than it was. The facts are already extraordinary. A 4-year-old disappeared. More than 2 years passed. Police received a tip. A search warrant was obtained. A detective noticed an unusual staircase, and behind it was the missing child, alive. That is enough. Paislee's story also reminds us why names matter. She was not simply the girl under the stairs. She was Paislee Joann Shultis. She was 4 years old when her disappearance began. She was 6 when investigators found her. She had an older sister. She had a legal guardian. And after the rescue, She was reunited with the people responsible for her care. The most important fact is not where she was hidden. It is that she was found. Years from now, people may remember the photographs of that staircase. They may remember the headlines. They may remember the police search. But the most meaningful part of the story should remain the same. Paislee was no longer missing. The case that began with an unanswered question finally had an answer. Where was Paislee? She was in Saugerties. How did police find her? A tip led them there, and Detective Eric Thiele noticed something unusual about a basement staircase. What happened after they found her? She was examined, reported to be in good health, returned to her legal guardian, and reunited with her sister. And what happened to the adults involved? They faced criminal charges, with the legal outcomes developing separately over the following years. That is where the verified story ends. Not with a sensational image, not with speculation about what Paislee may have thought, not with invented dialogue, but with a child who was found alive. For a case that began in July 2019, February 14, 2022, became the day everything changed. The search ended, the silence was broken, and Paislee's name was no longer attached to a missing child alert. It was attached to a rescue. Her story deserves to be remembered carefully. Not because the staircase was mysterious, not because the case generated shocking headlines, but because a child disappeared, investigators refused to let the case disappear with her, and eventually, a small detail in an ordinary-looking staircase helped bring her home. Every case deserves an answer. Every family deserves the truth. If you want more carefully researched true crime documentaries based on verified evidence and told with respect for the people at the center of each case, subscribe to The Silence Evidence. 7-year-old girl went to the park with her family, but she never came home. Her name was Emily Grace Jones. On March 22, 2020, Emily was enjoying an afternoon at Queen's Park in Bolton, England, when a stranger suddenly attacked her in broad daylight. The entire country was left asking one question: how could something like this happen in a crowded family park? The investigation uncovered evidence that led to one of the most talked-about court cases in the UK. But the legal outcome surprised many people. What investigators discovered, and what happened inside the courtroom, is something every true crime viewer should understand. Watch the full documentary on The Silence Evidence to see the complete investigation, the verified evidence, and the court's final decision. Before you go, do you think tragedies like this can ever be prevented? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Subscribe to The Silence Evidence, because every case deserves the full story, and every victim deserves to be remembered.